Hey everyone, in this video, we are gonna go through it's a finisher demo, and we're gonna do probably the most end-to-end workflow, or at least one of the workflows for banking automation integrated with Zoho Books on the debit side. And yeah, it's very exciting. It's a multi-step agent that we've created, which is also compatible with Zoho Books in this case, and will be premiering or accessible via Finade in the upcoming weeks. So it's very exciting. So let me kind of set the context here. So I'm in my Zoho Books, and we're going to try to take one of the transactions which are uncategorized without a vendor, and we're going to categorize them using the model, the finisher model. And we're gonna then that part, there's already a video showing how that works. But in this case, I'm gonna take that transaction, categorize it, and in the back end, it's actually pushing back the data to Zoho Books, and it's gonna do two things in this permutation. The first thing after categorizing it, it's gonna create a vendor. So it's predicting the vendor, and it's gonna create the vendor via the Zoho Books API. And then it's gonna categorize the transaction as an expense with the vendor in its appropriate category. So it's doing three things. This agent would do three things in particular order. One, take the transaction from Zoho, consider what it is, categorize it as an expense, what type of account, predict the payee, or the vendor, sorry, payee and vendor used exchangeably here. And then push back to Zoho, realize that it doesn't have a vendor already with that name, create a vendor, and then categorize the expense under that vendor and make sure everything is visible in Zoho. So for this, we're relying heavily on our model being able to work with the Zoho Books API, which is currently happening local in my system. But this multi-step agent is something that you would be able to run in the Finade marketplace very shortly. So with that being said, let's go through the process. So first things first, you're going to see here that I'm on the vendors page, and there are only four vendors right now: test user, Audible, Dropbox, YV Krishna. And we're going to go to transactions here. We're going to go to banking, uncategorized transactions. We're going to find a transaction, the one that I've already that I've prepared to feed into the model, which is Air India. So just do a Command F and do Air India. Could have been any transaction, just needed to prepare it and feed it into the model. But in this case, we're going to do Air India. So you can see here, Air India, and $8.28 with on June 18th. Okay. So back to our model here. You can see here, Air India full transaction details. I've exported it, and it's sitting right here. It's the same one, $8.28 on June 18th, and it is status uncategorized inside of Zoho. If you want to check that, we can do that right here. Click it. Well, obviously it's uncategorized because it's under uncategorized. And the description is Air India. The description is Air India Private Limited. So that's going to be what it tries to predict, as well as going to be able to create a vendor. Now, if you come back here, not only is it has to categorize it, but it must create the vendor, which doesn't exist. So it's checking, and then it's realizing it doesn't exist. Sorry, under purchases, vendors, it doesn't exist, has to create the vendor and then categorize it. So first, let's run the model. Okay, now let's make sure that we fed in the specific transaction spreadsheet that we want. And let's read this transaction via the model. And boom, it came out as an expense, travel expense, vendor name Air India, and the transaction ID is consistent. This is the actual expense for travel expense. This is the account ID that in Zoho. So now I have to take this transaction ID, And I'm going to be calling the Zoho transaction API. First, let's see if the vendor got automatically created there. Let's refresh here. And yep, Air India got created. And then now let's go back to the model. Let's get this transaction ID and punch it in here into the Zoho API console along with this predicted account ID. And okay, send that off and successfully categorized. So now we can go back to banking, go back to Bank of America, click all transactions, and boom, it has been categorized successfully with the new vendor. So travel expense as well with the vendor name that it automatically created. And it's now been successfully categorized. If you click it, it'll actually take you to the vendor page. So that is how it creates a transaction when a vendor is not there. It'll create the vendor and then it'll categorize the transaction. In my previous videos, I explained how it can do the categorization, even how it could feed it back into Zoho. I think that's how these category transactions got categorized. But now you can see an example of where the vendor, which wasn't previously there, did get created and then categorized it. In a subsequent video, we're going to create a bill, an outstanding bill with the vendor, and then we're going to do the categorization as well as the bill payment for the vendor with that same workflow. So stay tuned for that.